excited. All right, I'll hand it over to you, Teddy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, and do feel free. I know Meredith's going to be monitoring the chat box on the side. So if you have any questions throughout, feel free to stop me, Meredith. If you see something where you're like, hey, can we, clarify that, or that didn't, make 100% sense. Can we dive into that? Feel free to leave your questions as we go. And then we can always collect and wrap everything up at the end too. But I'm super excited to be here talking about content strategy and creating a strategic and SEO focused content strategy for your website. So just sort of an overview of what we're going to be covering. I'm going to start with just a very brief overview of what SEO is, why it's important, and sort of my ethos and approach to SEO and how that translates into content strategy, whether that be, just the standard business information on your website or moving into blogging and resource pages and things like that. Looking into pages versus posts and how to understand where you should be using different types of keywords across your website, how to find those keywords, how to incorporate them effectively onto your pages, how to optimize your content, and then of course some time for questions at the end as well. And so some goals that I have for this presentation is to take the overwhelm out of content. I know it can feel really daunting thinking, where do I even start? Looking at a blank page on your screen and thinking, oh my gosh, I have to write a blog post or write a service page. So hopefully this will help provide some direction and give you the confidence to make the right decisions for your website, giving you some actionable tips to then implement that and really make the most of the time and energy that you're putting into creating content for your website. Giving just a foundational understanding of SEO as well, and being able to make better decisions for your website when you're thinking, how do I add something of value here that is really going to convert? So a little bit about me. I've been working in digital marketing for over 8 years now, and through Searchlight Digital, I've worked with hundreds of different businesses of all different varieties. We have, of course, e-commerce, local service-based businesses, online and virtual businesses, international, really running the gamut, which has given me a lot of opportunity to see how content in particular can impact different types of businesses to help them really thrive online. I'm also a fourth generation entrepreneur and small business owner, so I understand the needs and the struggles and the joys and the triumphs of small business ownership and entrepreneurship. So I have a especially soft spot for working with small business owners and, of course, female-led businesses. I'm also a mom of 2 little girls living in Victoria, British Columbia, and I'm really proud to have Searchlight Digital, which is an all-Canadian, all-female company, and we're really passionate about helping businesses like yours thrive online. So a little overview of sort of what is SEO. Obviously, there's many different components of what makes SEO on a website, but really the ethos and the thought behind SEO is that every search engine is wanting to provide the highest quality and the most relevant result to a given search. And so when we approach our content through this lens of how can we provide value, how can we demonstrate our expertise and our authority, that's a really great way, without even having any technical knowledge or getting into the coding side of things, to develop content that is well suited for search engines. And of course, when we think of SEO, primarily we're thinking of Google because, of course, that is the largest search engine, but it's not just limited to Google as a search engine. There's also Pinterest, there's YouTube, there is Amazon, there is Etsy. So anywhere where you're searching, and now even increasingly TikTok, Instagram, all of these platforms are now becoming search engines. And so we really want to always be focusing on how relevant and how high quality is the content that we're creating. And so a lot of people ask me, do I still need a blog? Do I still need to be writing on my website? Why do I need to be doing this? And really SEO, even from a technical standpoint, and of course up to content, is centered around providing a really amazing experience for your users once they interact with your content. In this context, we're going to be talking about on our website, but we want to make sure that we are providing for them exactly what it is that they're looking for. And when you do blogging or create, additional landing pages on your site, resource pages, service pages, we're working towards creating the best content while diversifying those keywords. So oftentimes we will have one singular keyword in our mind where it's like, this is the keyword that I want to be ranking for. And of course, it's important to use that as our North Star. But if you're entirely reliant upon one keyword, if something were to happen, if the competitive landscape or the algorithm changes, then you're kind of stuck with whatever happens with that one keyword. Whereas blogging allows you to diversify and start to hit multiple keywords and bring traffic in from multiple different stages of consideration, different audiences, and thereby different keywords. And it's also when you are creating that content on your site, that can be used as a foundation for a wide range of marketing activities. So of course, you can be publishing social media posts that lead people back to your blog. If you send out email marketing or newsletters, that can be used to help fill in those, those email marketing. I've even seen some people use it for paid advertising. If you have retargeting and you want to bring people back to your website or re-engage them, you can actually use blog posts, landing, and resource pages to be able to build that connection and again, really demonstrate your expertise and what makes you different. So benefits of content for SEO. One, you have the long-term benefits. So blogging and really any content that goes on most search engines has a really long lifespan. And so people could be Googling years from now for something that you have written an amazing blog post about, and they will continue to come back to your site. And I know there's a lot of conversation also around sort of ownership, which is ownership of your content, of your client experience, and your website is a really amazing place for that. So if we're constantly bringing people back to our website, we have a greater ownership of their experience and how we can move them forward to that next best step. You also tend to get very highly targeted traffic. So of course, we have people who are now searching for what it is that you're providing. So they're already interested. They already have some level of awareness. Instead of presenting content to a cold audience, you already have a little bit of warmth and understanding and interest. So it's much easier to engage people through your website and the rest of your pipeline. You also then have improved user experience. So we're going to talk a little bit about linking your content throughout your site a little bit later on. But by having blog content that then links to service pages, or on your service pages, linking to further information through your blogs or your resource pages, people are able to get a much more complete picture of what it is that you do, getting all the information that they need to make an informed decision to move forward. So it really does improve that user experience. And from a data perspective, it will actually improve their time on site, their engagement rates, all of those really amazing metrics that we want to be seeing. It's also, again, really easy to repurpose that content. So I know a very common struggle of all business owners is I only have so much time. I can't be creating 100 different pieces of content. By creating one blog post, you're now able to very easily take snippets of that, share that to social media, have a video of you basically reading your blog post, put that up on YouTube, share it to Pinterest. So one blog post can really get a lot of mileage across many different platforms. It also gives you a professional and unique online appearance. So especially if you are in an industry where there's a lot of people who do something very similar, your differentiator is going to be your level of expertise and the trust that you build and your ability to translate your personality online. And so blogs and resource pages can be a really amazing place to do that. And I think a lot of service providers sometimes feel a little nervous in particular because they'll say, oh, well, am I giving away too much? Someone's going to be able to take this information and then just do it themselves, when really that's not the case. People are wanting to double check, okay, she knows what she's talking about. I can trust her and I'm willing to hand over the reins to this person because I already have built up that affinity and that trust with them. So for service providers in particular, this can be really, really valuable. And it also allows you to reach new locations and audiences. And so this in particular can be for service pages, testing out new services in particular. But by creating a page on your website, you're able to start testing and seeing, is there interest? Am I able to gain traction? Am I able to start generating business without having to really invest too much in actually setting up shop or doing anything that requires a lot of capital or resources up front? You can start to test and see if offshoots of your current offerings are actually going to be something that's viable to add to your business. So by creating, again, resource pages, service pages, or even blogs to help support that, you can start to test and see if any new business ventures might also be worthwhile. And so there's three different sort of categories of keywords. The first one is commercial and transactional keywords. And those are ones where someone is looking to buy. People are looking to make the purchase, work with the service provider. Really, that's sort of almost the end of the pipeline. And usually the pages that we're going to be using those for are our service pages or our product pages if you're a product-based business. So any of our keywords that are related to very specific and niche terms related to our product or service, any kind of direct matches to what it is that we provide or offer, those are going to be going on our service and our product pages. Then we have our informational keywords, and those are the questions that people are asking, any kind of clarifying questions, any kind of thoughts. Then this is really where our blog posts and our resource pages shine. So this is us answering questions, providing thought leadership, and reducing friction for any of our clients as they're going through that purchase decision-making process. Then we have navigational keywords, and these tend to be branded terms, things where people are trying to contact you, find out more about you, or know about your brand. And those are going to be more so on our primary pages. So things like your homepage, your about page, FAQs, any kind of policy or contact pages. That's where we're going to have more navigational keywords. And so as we look into and talk about our keyword research, and as you are looking at your own keyword research, you can start to sort of categorize these. And in fact, some keyword research tools will categorize these for you. And so that can help you to map out where is the most appropriate place on your site for you to include these types of keywords. And really, when you are doing your keyword research, you're wanting to look at a balance of volume and relevancy. So it can sometimes be attractive. You'll see a keyword and it's like, oh, this gets 100,000, searches every month. That's the one I should be going for. But oftentimes those are actually the more competitive keywords. And so certainly it's worthwhile to incorporate it if it is relevant to your business, but it's also worthwhile to sometimes look at ones with a lower search volume that are more niche and more highly targeted and more relevant to what it is that you provide. Because again, we're always looking at how can I provide the most relevant, the highest quality content that matches what that person is searching for. And so sometimes, depending on your industry, there's going to be these really big players that inherently might have a better match for some of those bigger keywords. But for some of the more niche questions, for some of the terms that are, a little bit more precise instead of those more high-level general keywords, you might be able to actually beat out some of the bigger competition by having higher quality and more relevant content for that niche term. Also looking at long tail keywords, which tend to be those questions or things with a lot of niche modifiers or adjectives. Looking out for those can also be really helpful. So instead of looking for, and again, this is just a very generic search where it's like, shoes, that's obviously very high level. And, we're going to use shoes on our website if we're a shoe store, but that might not be our 100% primary keyword. But if it's, white women's sneakers, low bottoms or something like that, colorful laces, that's going to be something that's much more niche and much more exact match to what you might be able to provide. So looking for some of those longer tail keywords that might have a lower search volume is actually a really great way to select which ones might be best for your website. And so when we're developing our content strategy, of course, we're going to start with our keyword research, but even going into our keyword research, using the information that you have instinctively for your business as a jumping off point can be really valuable. But keyword research is really great for sort of taking out some of those guesses or assumptions or hunches that we might have about how people are referring to and the questions that people have about our services, and can back that up with data. So we can say, I think people are referring to my business this way, but let's compare it against another common term just to really verify and see, are we, representing ourselves correctly? Are we presenting ourselves in a way that is being searched for? I think a lot of us can sometimes suffer from the burden of knowledge and the burden of being really deep into our own business and inadvertently be using, jargon or internal phrases that might not be an exact match to what people are looking for. So we always want to find a compromise between being, including those keywords that we know people are searching for while not compromising our brand voice and brand tone so that we can really let our personality shine. So keyword research is a really excellent way of, making sure that we are putting our time and our resources into something that has the greatest chance of reaching people. Then, of course, your subject matter expertise. So if you have a topic that you're really passionate about, that you want to dive into or talk about, especially if it's related, of course, to your business, that can be really valuable to start writing about and incorporating into your content strategy. Meredith and I were talking earlier about sort of the dawn of AI and, what that means for SEO and content. And with, AI now becoming more prevalent, this type of content can only be pulled from what already exists on the internet. AI is not yet able to sort of come up with net new, fresh thought leadership style content. And so that's really the new baseline. That's the new bare minimum, is what can be collected in bits and pieces from the internet. And the best way that you can set yourself apart is by coming up with, content that only you can really convey, that comes from your years of experience, that comes from your insight. So starting to look into your own subject matter expertise and thought leadership is a really important competitive differentiator in your content strategy. Then you also want to be thinking about your target audience. So thinking about what types of life phases they're in, what other questions they're talking about that maybe they're not quite thinking of your product or service yet. But if we cast the net a little bit wider and start to think about, like, for example, if you're a swimsuit brand, obviously something that's a little bit further down the pipeline is going to be like, plus size bathing suits or bikinis with, a specific pattern. But something that's a little bit higher level, you might be thinking, okay, people who are planning a beach vacation or bachelorettes, how to make that special and unique. Things that are tangentially related to your product or your service that you can then start to link and pull people towards that conversion, even if they weren't necessarily thinking about that yet. Then, of course, we have friction points. And I sort of mentioned this earlier, but if you find that there is a common question or hesitation or friction point that you see time and time again from your potential clients and your current clients, writing blog posts and content on your website that proactively addresses those concerns can be really valuable, because that's something that you can incorporate on the thank you page for your contact form. Or if someone signs up for your newsletter, you can have that as a part of your welcome series. If someone even just emails you and has a question, you can then provide them with that blog post that goes really in depth without cluttering up an email space. So looking at those friction points and trying to be proactive to say, we've already answered your question, we've already resolved your hesitation, here's something that will be of true value to you. So aside from the SEO benefits, we are always wanting to think about how can we provide value to our clients. And so here's a couple different keyword research tools that I think are really valuable, especially on the content strategy and blogging side. Ubersuggest is a really good free keyword research tool, and it will provide you with different questions that people are asking around a specific topic. It will provide suggested related searches. So as far as free tools go, Ubersuggest is pretty good. I think if you sign up for an account, you can get more results. If you're using it just fresh off the internet for free, I think you get like 10 or so, but a good jumping off point there. If you haven't heard of it, oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just wanted to mention I'm sending out this presentation, so if you guys are frantically trying to write this down, don't worry, you'll get a copy of this. Okay, I'll hand it back over.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, another really great one is Answer the Public. So again, I'm not sure if anyone has tried this one before, but it's really neat. Basically, you type in what they call a seed keyword, and so that would be like 1 to 3 words that's very succinct, that's related to your product, your service, your topic. And it will then give you all the questions that people are asking that are related to this topic. One of the things to keep in mind is right at the top, you have to make sure that you're looking for the correct country. I think by default, it might still be the UK, but just make sure you're searching in Canada or the US, wherever you're based. And it will give you a huge list of questions that you can then use to start putting together and saying, okay, here's a topic, here's a theme. How can we start building a blog post that helps to address all of these questions, that are kind of clumped together that makes sense. So Answer the Public, super interesting. Google Search Console. This is a webmaster tool that I think everybody, if you take one thing away from today's presentation, it's not about data or analytics, but make sure that you install Google Search Console on your website, because it's this amazing tool that is basically the window between your website and Google. And so you can let Google know, hey, here's the pages on my website, here's what I'd like you to see. And Google in return will say, okay, here's all the search phrases that have brought your website up in Google search. Here's the exact things that people are searching for. Here's how many impressions you got. Here's how many clicks you got, what your average ranking is, lots of really amazing data. But it's really valuable because one, you can start to see what it is that people are searching for that already brings your website up. And you can actually go in on a per page basis and see what are the search terms that are bringing up some of the blog posts that I already have, or some of the service pages that I already have. And if there is something that is coming up that you don't already have included on your pages, you can then say, okay, either you can make a brand new, blog or service page that directly addresses that term, or you can go back in and re-optimize the content that you already have. And I think that's such a missing piece that content strategy sometimes misses is, of course, we want to be creating new content, but we also want to be making the most of the content that we've already created and going back through and seeing what search terms are coming up for that content can be a really valuable way of going back in and refining the content, adding in one paragraph here, switching up a heading to better address some of those search terms, and really help to continue to improve that content's lifespan. YouTube and Pinterest is also a really interesting place to get content ideas. I find in particular, YouTube is fascinating because sometimes people will create YouTube videos, but they won't necessarily have a blog or any kind of website presence, just some, YouTube dedicated creators. And so oftentimes if you can find YouTube content that has really resonated and really performed well on YouTube, but does not have a correlating blog post, that might be an opportunity where you can then create content. Obviously, you don't want to be ripping off the YouTube video, but using it as inspiration to then create your own content to help diversify how you're showing up and how those, that content is showing up in a search result. So YouTube is a really great place to brainstorm. Same with Pinterest. Again, if you start typing in at the top your core service or product offering, it will start to provide suggested searches at the top. You can see what kind of content is performing well on there, and then use that as a jumping off point for brainstorming your own blog posts. Similar with Google suggested searches. So if you start typing in the top of a Google search, it will provide those recommendations. Oftentimes there'll be also like a people also asked section in the search results. You can start to see what are some clarifying questions, what are some related questions that people are asking that is showing up prominently in Google. And then also right at the very bottom, sometimes there will be those recommended additional searches. So starting to see what is Google recommending to people, that can be a really great way for you to start to capitalize on some of those offshoot searches, especially for some of those higher level or more competitive keywords. And that sort of brings us to a competitor analysis. And this can be done in two different ways. So one, of course, if you have some direct competitors where you're starting to look into and see what type of topics are they writing about, how can we, improve upon what they're doing or take inspiration from what your competitors are doing. But on the other hand, you can say, okay, I really want to rank for this particular keyword or this particular question. Let's search that and see who is coming up in those top 3 spots, who is performing really well. Let's take a look at their content and then see how we can make something that's even better. So maybe it's, adding even more context. Maybe it's creating an infographic or adding pictures. Maybe it's adding an extra 250 words to the link that they have put out. Looking and seeing what is already performing, how are they doing that, and then how you can then improve upon that will give you a much better chance of actually ranking. Google Trends is also a really interesting tool where you can compare and contrast keywords. And I find this is super helpful where, again, if you have a business where people maybe refer to it as more than one thing, it's really nice to be able to go in there and say, okay, for my country or even my province or state, how are people referring to the thing that I am doing? For example, I had one client and it was a school and they had a program and they were trying to decide, should we call it a junior kindergarten or a preschool? How do we want to phrase this? And so it was really nice to be able to just go into Google Trends, compare the two, and be able to see some unbiased data to show what people are searching for more so that they can customize their content to better serve that. So Google Trends, very interesting there. And then, of course, client feedback. So very similar to those friction points and your subject matter expertise, but if you have people who are frequently asking you a question, or you find yourself in conversation about something often with your clients, that's a really great place to inspire, blog topics and thinking of what you can write that will resonate and connect with your current clients and then therefore your ideal clients as well. And so a little bit about pages versus posts. And we sort of covered this on, the different keyword types, but pages are really for business information. So your homepage, about page, service pages, things that ideally you're going to be linking in your top navigation. So are people trying to actually be able to work with you, find out about your services directly? That information is much better on a page because they tend to be a little bit more, we tend to not have like hundreds of pages, especially on a service-based business site. But for e-commerce, you would have lots of different pages for your actual products and your collection pages, but they tend to be organized in a pretty succinct way in your main navigation so that people can quickly and easily navigate to where it is that they want to go. So again, this is great for those exact match, anything also that's location based. So if you serve a particular location, any of those, wedding planning in Toronto, that's great for a page. But for posts, this is where you're going to put in those answering questions, really diving in deep to answering questions, providing thought leadership, resources, roundups, things like that. Those are better in posts because, again, you tend to have a larger volume of those, and then they can be organized into your blog section so it's not impeding your user experience on your main site. Granted, we are going to want to link between these two pages strategically so that you can provide that additional information and continue to engage anyone who does land on your website. So for example, on a service page, you might want to have a link to 3 really relevant blog posts at the bottom so that people can learn more, or they can be more comfortable with their decision. Similarly, in your blog posts, anytime that you mention your specific product or service offerings, you always want to be linking back to those service pages so that people can take that next best step. And so using your keywords on your site, once you have decided on, your long tail keywords or even your related keywords, going through and making sure that those are effectively incorporated throughout your page is, of course, one of the most important ways to help your content actually rank. So for kind of going top to bottom, you have your page title and your meta description, and this can be updated in the SEO settings on basically every platform. And the nice thing about this is that it doesn't actually impact what people see on your page. So by default, if you make a blog post, whatever your blog title is that you put in, by default, that will be your SEO page title. But you do have the opportunity to edit and adjust that so that it's not an exact match to the blog post topic. Of course, you want to make sure that they are related, but you can tighten it up a little bit. You can, maybe put a little bit more keyword emphasis, add even a secondary keyword into there if it makes sense, and really optimize it for search, because that's going to be one of the first elements that Google and its crawlers read on a page to determine what is this page about? What is this content and why is it relevant? So making sure that you optimize that, super valuable. Same with the meta description. This is sort of when you do a search on Google, page title is that big headline, and then the meta description is the 1 to 2 sentences beneath it. And that's really your marketing copy that says, why should someone click on this particular article when they're in a search? And this is a great place to incorporate keywords, because if you do have an exact match to the keyword that a person has just searched, Google will actually bold that result, and it draws the eye and it improves your click-through rate. So you want to make sure that it's catchy, that it is in plain English, that people can understand. It's not just a string of keywords, but effectively incorporating that keyword, ideally early in the meta description, can be a really helpful way to attract users to clicking on your result in search. Then you have your heading. So coming on to the actual page itself. When people are making blog posts, I see this mistake quite often where when you have different sections in your blog, sometimes people will just bold their heading. So it'll be regular paragraph copy that they just bold, or they will use different heading styles because it looks good or it looks cool. But heading structure is really important for our blog content, again, for both Google and for users to understand what is included in this content and in this blog, and how is it structured, and how are each of these elements related to each other. So I always say they're kind of like those, like the Russian nesting dolls, where the H1 covers all the H2s, and within the H2s are the H3s. So there is an actual hierarchy and relationship between those heading structures. So if you go back into any content you've previously created, and you see that there is an H4 and then an H2 and then 3 H1s, making sure that that's structured logically can be very helpful in Google understanding what our content is about. Of course, throughout the copy, you want to make sure that you include your target keywords, but also those related and semantic keywords as well. And this helps to make sure that your content doesn't sound overstuffed or like a robot made it. You want it to sound natural, but you also want there to be enough information in here that, again, Google and your users understand what you're talking about. Again, like we'd mentioned previously, sometimes we get so deep in our own, wording and sometimes, jargon, for lack of a better term, that it can sometimes impede clarity. So we always want to make sure that it is very clear what it is that we are talking about. It's also great to have images if you have any sort of unique images that you have taken or any infographics. That can be super valuable, but it's also an opportunity to show up in image search results. So if you put appropriate image alt text on your images, that can also help for you to show up in image search results and diversify the way that you're showing up in Google. And then finally, your URL. So that, of course, is the thing right at the top of your search bar when you're typing in your website, making sure that that URL is succinct and clear and ideally does contain your keywords. What I will sometimes see is that people will maybe duplicate a previous post and then sort of forget to change the URL, or by default, certain CMS platforms will just have a string of letters and numbers and it doesn't really make sense. Making sure that that's nice and clean and clear can be really helpful for users to know that they're in the right place, and for, again, Google and search engines to have a better understanding of what is actually on your page. So again, I just put a note here that these can all be updated in your settings, depending on what type of website you're using. Those might look, a little bit different. But again, we're wanting to incorporate all these different types of keywords throughout our site. So when we even think about our North Star keywords, that likely only will apply to one type of page or one type of content on your website. So you're wanting to make sure that you are incorporating things related to your location and informational keywords and the transactional and commercial keywords. So really diversifying that to paint a complete picture and attract users at all different levels of consideration. So a little bit about sort of structuring your site for success, especially if you are a service provider, but even product-based and e-commerce businesses. I've seen this where they'll have one page where they try to target all of their different business endeavors. So if you have multiple services that you provide or multiple product types, instead of putting everything just onto one page, breaking them out so that each page, or pardon me, each service has its own page and each product type has its own page. And again, this comes back to relevance. It's really hard to be extremely relevant for a search term when you're talking about 10 different things on one page. So breaking and separating those out is going to be really valuable for making sure that your content can be completely customized and completely optimized to the keywords that are best associated with what it is that you're offering there. Again, clear URLs. Pardon me, clear URLs, especially for those service pages. I've seen people who have used website templates and they've created new pages, but they forgot to change the URL, and it's made for some pretty funny pairings. So always going back and making sure that those URLs are correct and are accurate to the content that's actually on the page. Calls to action is also a really important element of any page that you have on your website, but I see this missed most often with blog content and resource pages. So a lot of people say, well, blogs aren't really worthwhile because they're not going to drive any business for me. Like, how do I use these to convert? And that is creating calls to action and next best steps. So you're always trying to think, what is the next thing that I would like someone to do once they consume this content or land on this page? And how do I make that so painfully clear and obvious and easy for them to do? And that might look like multiple, buttons moving people to that next best step, whether that's, purchasing a product, contacting you, service pages, whatnot, making sure that it's linked throughout, making sure that you have a final call to action. You don't want to leave people hanging at the end of the post, assuming that, oh, well, they'll go into my main navigation or they'll look around. No, we want to make it super easy, super quick. And especially if you're thinking of someone on mobile where they might not be able to see, all of the different elements at once, we want to make sure that it's nice and easy to help people move to that next step. Internal linking throughout. I feel like I've mentioned this a lot, but again, that helps to, of course, engage people, but it also helps with the actual structure and hierarchy of your site. And that's really nice for Google when they are crawling your website and seeing how are all of these different pages related? How are all of these different pieces working together? And it starts to help them create a map of, oh, this isn't just a one-page website talking about this topic. There's lots of pages. This person is covering multiple topics that are all related to this one particular, niche or industry. This person is clearly an expert. They're clearly authoritative. This site is more relevant, and that's what's going to help you boost your rankings there. Same here with clear navigation. So similar to those calls to actions, you want to make sure that your navigation is not super cluttered. This can be, of course, at the top, also in your footer, but you want to make sure that you are helping to move people to that next best step easily and putting things there that help them, again, move clearly. So ideally, you don't want much more than like 7 options at the top. Drop downs can be really helpful for breaking down and, and adjusting how people can see that information. But making sure that your navigation is structured logically and clear as possible is super helpful there too. So a couple different sort of pointers for copywriting, specifically incorporating SEO, of course, including your keywords. And I think that this is something that's very easy to incorporate on the blogging side, just instinctively, because you're writing about that topic. But I see people struggle a little bit more on primary pages, so even your homepage or your service pages. Sometimes people will, again, really put that brand tone and that brand voice and storytelling really very much in the forefront, to the point that there is that lack of clarity. So people can say, oh, creating memories to last a lifetime with your family and friends. What is that? Are you a wedding planner? Are you a photographer? Are you a bouncy castle rental? What exactly is your business? So making sure that there is that element of clarity and ideally exact match keywords, that will help make sure that regardless of where someone is coming from, whether it is social media or whether it's organic search, that they will know that they've landed in the right place, they're finding the right thing, and that will help them sort of check that box in their mind so that they can move on to really learn more about you. Again, using those related search terms. So you don't just want to use one keyword a dozen times throughout a post, where to the point where, and I think we've all experienced this, where you're reading a page and you're like, who has written this? It's just the same keyword over and over again. And it feels a little bit off-putting because it feels a little disingenuous. But that's where doing that keyword research and coming up with those related search terms and the variety of questions that people are asking will help to make sure that people can, again, verify the information that they're looking for and receive that without feeling like, am I being scammed? Is this spammy? I don't trust this. So it's sounding really natural and organic. Using those headings and subheadings, I've touched on, of course, how they should be related, but it's also really important to visually call out certain pieces of information, especially if you're creating a blog post or something really long form. Having those headings and subheadings can be really helpful to draw the eye, quickly be able to scan the information. And of course, Google is then also able to break down and say, okay, here's the 10 questions that are very, clearly covered in this blog post. And that actually also gives you the opportunity to be featured in those featured snippets or those people also asks. If you have your content structured logically, you start to be able to show up in many different ways. Also using bullet points or, kind of shorter, pithier chunks of content. Sometimes, especially if we're very passionate about what it is that we do, we can write very long, in-depth content, but people oftentimes are looking for answers to questions, bullet pointed forms where they can say, okay, yep, checklist, I can quickly absorb that information, and then I can dive in a little bit more if I also want to, or feel like I need additional context. So I often get a lot of questions about, how often should I be blogging? How long should blog posts be? And I feel like this sort of is a really good guideline for people because it is so unique and it is so different for each person. And I always start with quality over quantity. And that is, if you have the time and capacity to do many, many different blog posts, that's great. But oftentimes people will really only have capacity, especially if they're writing it, for 1 to 4 blog posts each month. And it's better to do fewer blog posts that are much more higher quality, that are longer, that are more in-depth, that are more robust than many smaller, less information-rich posts. So really it's about assessing your own capacity and your own resources and being able to say, okay, how many posts can I really give it my all and really put a lot of quality into this? And that sort of relates then to the completeness. So people, again, often ask, how long should a blog post be? And it's sort of similar to how long should a piece of string be? It depends. And so if you are answering a really niche and specific question, oftentimes you can get away with a 500-word post because people are just looking for an answer. They don't necessarily need to see the whole life story behind, a particular topic. They're really just looking for what is the formula, what is the length, what is the measurement, something like that. And so if it's complete after 500 words, that's great. If it is something that is, an ultimate guide to, that's probably going to have to be, at least 2,000 words to be able to fully and completely answer and speak to that search term. So the length of the post that you need can really vary based on the topic. And this is, again, where competitive analysis and research can come in handy. And you can see for the people who are ranking in those top 3 positions, how long are their blog posts? And that's going to give you a pretty good idea of how long you should be searching for or shooting for getting that blog post length. And I think that these other 2 comments, the more niche, the better, and answering specific questions, especially if you're in an industry with some really big players, oftentimes going for those more niche terms is the way to sort of work around some of the more competitive nature of your industry. And so if you have really specific, really niche questions that you can bring a lot of authority to, and you can provide that quality, relevant content, that is going to be much more effective than, perhaps even some of those ultimate guide posts. So don't discount some of the smaller, more niche terms in favor entirely of those very large scale, high level terms. So just a couple general tips, certainly to do with, blogging, but also just SEO in general. I know I mentioned a Google Search Console, but also making sure that you have Google Analytics added to your site. This is super helpful because if you are creating content or if you're marketing in any way, you want to be able to measure the effectiveness of that marketing. Certainly if you are paying for any kind of marketing, so if you're paying for any kind of ads, you want to make sure that you have some data that you can reflect on to see how many people are coming to your website, how are they engaging with that website with that content, and then how is that converting? So is that actually leading to purchases or signups or contact form submissions, whatever that looks like to you. Of course, researching your keywords, don't just leave it to chance or guess. Do a little bit of research to back up any of your decisions with data. Making sure that keywords, including your topics, your products, your questions, your location, and your business name are incorporated and woven throughout your page titles and your meta descriptions. Creating those dedicated pages for each area of focus. Make those collection pages if you're an e-commerce business. Make the dedicated service pages if you're a service-based business. And then creating those blog posts, answering those questions, and weaving them throughout the other pages on your website. A couple things not to do that I see very commonly across lots of different websites is text incorporated into images. And so instead of having an actual header typed out on your website, it being an image of that word. Google is getting better at understanding words on images, but you want to make it easy for Google to understand what's going on your page, and you don't want to be missing any of those important elements. So making sure that that is inputted actually as text and not as an image. Not having your main keywords on your homepage. I think we covered that with the general making memories, but not very specific in what you actually do. The lack of clarity in your business and service or product information. This, again, will go inherently hand in hand with making sure that your target keywords are incorporated, whether it's a product page, whether it's a main page, whether it's a service page. Being very clear and very explicit about your product or service is going to inherently incorporate those related keywords. For getting a custom meta description. So another thing that we had talked about with where to incorporate your keywords, if you don't put in a custom meta description, then what Google is going to do is just pull the first piece of content that it thinks is relevant to describe the page. And sometimes it really isn't. Sometimes it can pull code, it can pull an image description, things that you don't necessarily want to have showing in Google search results. So taking a moment, it's usually around 160 characters that you're wanting to shoot for. So about a tweet's worth of marketing copy to really engage and attract people to click into your site. Of course, using the wrong keywords. I think this again comes back to our own bias and thinking, oh, this is what everybody's looking for when really they're not. And then not reviewing or tracking your data. So again, if you're putting a lot of time and effort into your blogs, you want to see which ones are performing. Is it lists? Is it, targeting a specific audience or question types? That way you can make better decisions moving forward about the type of content that you should be creating. And again, when you're marketing, if you're spending a lot of time on Instagram or you're putting a lot of money into email marketing, you want to make sure that those efforts and that you're seeing the ROI from those efforts. So reviewing your data, looking back through is a really important way of making sure that you are, again, making the most of the limited time and resources and effort that I know we all have to spare. So I hope that this was helpful and a really great overview for creating that content strategy, a little bit of a sprinkling of SEO to help be able to support that. But yeah, I'd love to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you so much, Teddy.
Yeah.
That was really, really helpful.
Awesome.
I have a couple questions right off the hop, but if anyone else has anything, they can go first. Don't see anybody going off mute. Heather, I think I'm going to be asking a question for you, actually. Okay, my first question, and this came to mind because Heather is, we've been working together for a while, actually, and she does the most beautiful wedding stationery. And stationery is a very common misspelled word. And so how do you, maybe you already understand my question, how do you use that so that you can capture when people are not spelling it correctly?
Yeah, usually Google is pretty good at correcting people. And oftentimes you'll see at the top where it's like, did you mean this other thing? So the only time that I think it might be, you'd have to consider is American versus Canadian spelling of a word. I don't think there's a difference for stationery, but for anything that has an OU in it, that's when you might start to see, okay, am I targeting a primarily US audience? Am I targeting primarily Canadian audience? And potentially, choosing one, you do want to be consistent just for grammatical sake, but yeah, making sure that you're using the phrasing and the spelling of your target location. I think sort of an offshoot of this also could be, again, how people refer to your product. So I think of, a very common one is like hoodie, pullover, and jumper. So those are all talking about the same thing, but depending on where you are located, even, East Coast, West Coast, or you think about like toque versus beanie versus, some of these things where it's just the semantics and the phrasing, you're going to want to use something like Google Trends to see, okay, if I'm primarily targeting people in, British Columbia versus Ontario, or the States versus Canada, how should I be referring to this product or the service that I perform?
Awesome.
Yeah.
I have another one.
Yeah.
So in Squarespace specifically, and I'm sure this is common for all other website platforms, you can have blog posts that are in draft form, or you can have them complete and then you can actually have it scheduled to post. So my question is, I assume they're not beneficial until they're actually published. Is that?
Yeah. Okay. And not only just until they're published, but also until they're actually indexed in Google. So I don't want to get, too like technical or scary, but this is another really helpful part of Google Search Console. I always use the analogy because I feel like, I'm a millennial, and so this resonates with me, but like, think of like a Harry Potter library. Google is like a Harry Potter library where the librarians are actual spiders that crawl throughout the library and they pick the book based on what you have asked. And so if your book or your page isn't in the library, then they can't give that to the person who's asking. And so that's basically the process of actually indexing. So just because you've created a page, usually this is done automatically, but sometimes Google will mistakenly say, oh, this page isn't actually relevant, or you have another page that's just like this, so we're not going to index it. So that can be something very valuable in Google Search Console, is to make sure that all of these blog posts that you've created are actually indexing and are in the library that Google can then pull and choose from. So certainly, yes, we want to make sure that those are published, but it is also worthwhile if you feel for some reason that you're not getting the traffic that you expected, or you're not getting any traffic, to go back and make sure that that is actually indexed and available in Google Search.
Awesome. I have another one.
Yeah.
So I assume this is the case for you as well. Is there a sweet spot for when somebody should be investing in SEO? Like, are there certain parts of the business that obviously they need a website, right? So that one is a given, but are there other elements where you're like, oh, it doesn't make sense for you to do this yet, or, oh, shoot, you really should have done it earlier? Like, where is that sweet spot?
Yeah, I consider SEO to be a foundational marketing activity. So even if you are not, in some capacity, everyone is doing ongoing SEO by the virtue that your website continues to exist. But if you have SEO best practices baked into your website from the moment you launch it onto the internet, you are going to have a better chance of certainly ranking in organic search. But I think a lot of the things that we've talked about even throughout this presentation, it does apply to if you're driving traffic from any other location. So if you are driving people from Instagram, we want to make sure that our keywords are still incorporated on that page so that people know exactly what it is that we provide and exactly what it is that we do. If you're doing any kind of paid advertising, if you have your keywords effectively researched and incorporated on your site, you're actually going to get a better bang for your buck and more mileage from your paid advertising because there's more relevancy for that landing page and a better match with the keywords that you're trying to bid on. So it's really important there as well. And I'd say also for, if you're a service-based business in particular, or even product-based business, oftentimes we will, create our website and then we don't really have new services coming out or maybe even new products. We sort of have our suite, we have our offerings, and it remains the same. And so being able to create new, fresh content that shows that we are still an active, thriving business, that shows Google that we are participating and that we're keeping our website up to date. Again, diversifying keywords, writing those blog posts and contributing to your website in that way can be really helpful across all of your marketing channels. So I always recommend even just an initial on-site optimization for a brand new website. That's going to be a really great foundation and a great start because you don't want to start pouring people onto a website that, from a technical perspective is slow, has user experience problems, doesn't, isn't clear about what you do, because in my mind, a lot of that will then be wasted. So early and often is a good sort of SEO cadence.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Does anyone else have any questions for Tedi? You did a really good job, Tedi. I'm not surprised that there's not questions.
I just have questions, but I know obviously this, this conversation was really around content strategy, but if anyone has just like general SEO questions as well, I'm happy to answer them now.
Nothing's coming up. A sign of a solid presentation.
Okay. I was going to say, I hope that this is an indication that this is not totally overwhelming and no one knows what to do with this. So yeah, certainly if you have any questions moving forward, please do feel free to reach out. Always happy to help. Obviously, feel free to shoot Meredith a message. Feel free to reach out to me directly. Always happy to provide some guidance and support, because I think it's so important for every website. I think there's a lot of missed opportunity. A lot of people, I think sort of what you were alluding to is, oh, I'll do it down the road. I'll do it later. I'll do it once I start getting traffic or, start getting people to my website. But really it's, you have to put the horse before the cart. You have to make sure that you have the thing that can move you forward in place so that you can really thrive online. So yeah, I'd love to support anyone or, answer any questions if needed after this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tedi.
Absolutely.
So as I said, I'll send out Tedi's presentation and this replay for everyone, so you guys can go back and see all those resources. So I think I have some work to do myself. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.